Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the question and answer session, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone and please record your name after the prompt. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now, I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Safa Aima. Sir, you may begin.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm sure we have participants from all over the country and out in the Pacific. Apologies for our late start. We are, trying to catch up with the times and get technically savvy on our end. So apologies again for the late start. My name is Safa Aina. I am the Associate Dean and Director of the Asian American Resource Center at Pomona College. I'm also the board chair for EPIC, Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, and the former vice chair for the White House initiative for the Commission on Asian American and Pacific Islanders. And I'd like to welcome you all to the first of what we hope to be a series of webinars that begins to look at the issue of higher education in our Pacific Islander community, particularly how it can help to transform our community. There's a Samoan proverb that I like to sort of use in my own life. It goes like this: the path to leadership is through service. And for many Pacific Islanders, myself included, I think it really has been about trying to figure out how our culture and our values that we learn in our home and through our parents and through our communities can maintain and even help to propel us through today. Another saying that I'd heard before from some of our community elders is it's not necessary to westernize in order to modernize, but it's very important and critical that we retool ourselves for the environments that we live in and for the generations that are coming. And so it's really, this conversation comes, I believe, at the right time for us to think about and look at and have a conversation around the role of higher education and how it can impact the future success of our communities. We have with us some wonderful panelists, folks who I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with and meeting to join us and talk a little bit about their work and their interests in this particular topic. First panelist we have is Akil Vohra. He's a senior advisor with the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. He's going to talk about and contextualize the current state of education for NHPIs as it relates to the work that he's done through the White House Initiative. We also have Dr. Randall Akee, a Native Hawaiian assistant professor of public policy at UCLA. He's going to talk a little bit from the policy researcher perspective on higher education and its significant role in the empowerment of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. Also on the line we have Sheryl Day, PhD candidate in information policy at the University of Washington from the beautiful island of Guam, Samoa sister. She's going to share her perspectives as a graduate student and the process that she's had to go through, both in terms of her personal life and how she sees that relating to the empowerment of herself, her family, and her community. And then lastly, we have Savenaca, Fijian political science undergraduate student at the University of California in Irvine. And Save is going to talk about some of the many wonderful things that he's done on his campus and in, as well as in the larger community. So with that, I want to turn over to our first panelist, Akil Vohra.
Thanks, Safa, and thanks to everyone for joining us on the call today. As Safa mentioned, I'm just going to provide a brief overview on the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community and educational attainment, and talk a little bit about one specific federal program where we're hoping to work and empower AAPIs. So I just wanted to start off with a little bit of context and note that with each year, the U.S. is really succeeding in educational attainment. We're narrowing the educational gap and increasing high school graduation rates among students of color. In fact, according to the U.S. Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics, and we call that NCES. High school graduation rates have actually increased by nearly 4 percentage points from 2011 to 2013, and that's outpacing the growth for all students in the nation. While we see the high numbers indicated for Asians and Pacific Islanders, there really remains data that is hidden behind these numbers that doesn't represent the reality of educational attainment for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander subgroups. So, Chris, if we could stay on this slide for a second. So when we speak of educational attainment for the NHPI community, we really celebrate the growth and improvement in increasing numbers of students completing a secondary education. But more importantly, we have to pay closer attention to areas where educational disparities still exist. So it's important for us to look at the data where many NHPIs struggle to achieve educational attainment in college. With the first slide, what we see is that when we look at high school completion rates, and this is the most recent data that we have for a 3-year period from 2011 to 2013 from the U.S. Census. And we see for whites, the high school completion rate is 94%. For NHPI subgroups, it is much lower. So in the first graph, in the first bar, when we refer to Polynesians, that's kind of census terminology. This includes communities from Hawaii, from Tonga, from Samoa. That middle group of Melanesians, where we see the high school completion rate at 25%, we're talking about individuals from Fiji, from Vanuatu. And for Micronesians, where we see the high school graduation rate at 35%, we're talking about individuals from the Marshall Islands and Northern Mariana. So we can see that for high school graduation rates, NHPIs are much below the white population. Next slide. So now what we're looking at in this slide is bachelor's degree attainment. Okay. So when we're using whites as kind of a benchmark, we see that the college graduation rate is almost 40%. Again, the numbers for the NHPI community broken down in 3 major categories are much less. So 11% for Polynesians, 13% for Melanesians, and barely 8% for folks from Micronesia. So I think we have a lot of work to do, and this is kind of in a very global way providing us just really, really broad numbers. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in this slide, what we hope to do is just break out the numbers a little bit more. So we are including both high school completion rate here, as well as bachelor's degree or higher, compared not only with the white population and the major subgroups of Polynesian, Melanesia, and Micronesian, but broken down by specific subgroups. So we're looking at Native Hawaiians, Samoans, Tongans, Guamanian, Chamorro, and Fiji. What I also wanted to highlight for you is not just the comparison benchmark of the white population, but looking at other communities of color and examining what their educational attainment rates are. So when we look at the rates for African American or Black, which is second from the left, we see that for many in the PI community, the educational attainment rate falls lower. And the same for Latino. We're seeing that educational attainment rate ends up being a little bit lower. I do think it's a little unfortunate when we talk about the equity agenda when it comes to education that this is not talked about a little bit more, right? When we talk about communities of color and we talk about where the disparities lie, this data shows that there are huge disparities in communities that we're concerned about. And I think this information has to be drawn to our community and to be drawn to policymakers to ensure that we're part of the conversation and they're programs specifically created where we have an opportunity to start enriching the lives of our students. Next slide. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think there are a range of programs that the federal government offers that target our communities. One of them is the APSA program. So I always joke that this is a horrible name. It's hard to remember, but I think once you get it, you'll never forget it. So it's called the Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution Program. It is a program offered through the Department of Education. It is targeted to 2-year community colleges and 4-year universities that must meet a specific threshold. They must have a minimum of 10% AAPI undergraduates, and they must meet certain numbers to qualify that they are serving needy students. Okay. In large part, we're talking about the communities, again, that we're concerned about. A majority of our community are at 2-year community colleges. A majority of the institutions that can qualify for this program are at 2-year community colleges. So we want to make sure that you know about this program and also send it to the schools that are in your areas so they can take advantage. The main goal of the program is to really kind of support institutions and support capacity building efforts for our targeted demographic. There are a range of activities a school can utilize, including building structures on campus, creating additional mentorship programs, building out curriculum. So there's a lot of flexibility and in ways that we think really benefit our students. Our goal at the initiative is to really make sure you know about this information, make sure you are attending the technical assistance webinars, and are encouraging your schools, or if you're at a school, to apply for the program. And I think there's some additional information there about what we do. I will say that if you are interested in learning more about this, we work on an APSA newsletter that comes out, I think, quarterly. So please contact your leadership and Christine Harley, who put the webinar together, and we can get information out to you. So next slide. This is a very simple map. We also have this on our website. So if you go to the White House Initiative on AAPI's website, we have this information there. The orange areas highlight where AAPI communities are across the United States, right? So in places you would suspect, New York, New Jersey, California, but also in emerging areas like Arkansas and Utah, where we know there's a lot of NHPI communities. In addition, the blue markers indicate where these APSA institutions are. Next slide. I just want to give a really quick example before I turn it over. One of the recipients of the APSA grant is South Seattle Community College. They received a 5-year, $2 million, and the second bullet point talks a little about what they're kind of doing. I will say the reason why we're highlighting this specific institution and this specific program is because we know leadership there. We know Rochelle, who is specifically working with the Samoan population through this grant. And she's working on peer mentoring. She's working on small group cohorts where they put these communities together to study together, to be in classes together. And data has shown that we've seen some success in how these interventions really help support persistence and college graduation. So with that, I'll turn it over back to Sefa to talk a little bit more about the other work. But if any individuals have questions about the program or data, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Thanks, Akil. And we'll have time at the end of our conversation for question and answer. Definitely appreciate informing the group about APSAs. If you're not familiar, if the local institutions actual on a PC institutions, you could definitely log on to the White House Initiative website and find out the information there, or the U.S. Department of Education and find out the information there. It's a great program. South Seattle is just one of the many schools that are an NPC school. Many of them are actually in the Pacific, Hawaii, and Guam, and other places. So it's a great program. It's definitely a good start, but obviously there's still a lot more work to do. I think the other thing I would take away from Akil's comments is just where are we in the conversation, particularly on this equity agenda, and how are we not being talked about, and how are we not being included in these conversations. So definitely good stuff, but again, we will do the question and answer at the end. Our next speaker is Randy Akee, the Assistant Professor at the Department of Public Policy and American Indian Studies at UCLA. Randy?
Hi, aloha, everybody. So thanks for having me, and thanks for participating, everyone. I will, I guess my sort of role or my discussion here is to talk about sort of the importance of data and how we use it and how we employ it in the determination of policy and the determination of program development, and how it interacts with the information that we just saw, for instance, sort of the discrepancies and the disparities in the educational attainment across these different Pacific Island populations. So I'll just give you a brief background of myself. I'm Native Hawaiian, born and raised in Hawaii. I finished my college degree, was interested in economics, continued on to get a PhD in economics, and the research that I do looks at primarily at economic development. So I do quantitative research, primarily at a microeconomic level, and I'm interested in things such as what are the obstacles to educational attainment for individual households, and primarily Indigenous people's households. So I look at American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islands, as well as First Nations in Canada. And so the thing that I'll sort of emphasize is that now I'm a professor, so I've gone through various stages of my own career and my own life as a consumer of data, as a person who sees data and works with data. I started off a number of years working at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, which is an agency in Hawaii that works for the betterment of Native Hawaiians and pursues several different programmatic and policy-driven activities, many of which are, sort of in order to specifically improve the conditions of Native Hawaiians. And one of the things I was keenly aware of while working there is the need for sort of the ability to analyze data, to quantitatively analyze data and come up with recommendations and policies that in a way that can make it understandable to legislators, community members, and staff. And so that was one of the interests of my own, which propelled me to get a PhD in economics, because those skills were sorely lacking in many of the agencies and communities that I was already working in. And the idea was to pursue it further, because the way the analysis had been done or was being conducted was that outsiders were often doing the data analysis, the report writing, and the consumers of the reports, the policymakers, the legislators, the program officials, sometimes would have understanding of the data, sometimes wouldn't. And that's where I think the disparity exists, this large gap between the ability to understand the method, the data, the underlying variables and names of the, or not names, but the measures themselves, and challenge those measures and challenge whether or not those accurately depict the communities that we care about. in the ways that we care about, and whether or not we're getting an accurate measure of existing sort of an appropriate snapshot of the way things are going currently, as well as the sort of trajectory of those variables and outcomes that we care about. And so as a professor now, sort of at a big university, UCLA, which has a very large Pacific Islander population, I still see that the emphasis is less on quantitative of the students. Their interests in general are not highly quantitative in nature, although students are often very interested in helping their communities. And this is an additional way of helping your communities sort of engaging in data analysis, engaging in getting your feet and hands wet in some sense with using actual data. And I say this because there's a lot of room for improvement in data collection in terms of every time the census comes out, as well as the American Community Survey, which is an additional census product that happens annually these days. There's an important need for communities of color in general, but Pacific Islander communities in particular, to get the word out and have people return the forms. These days, much more of it is being done online. The Census Bureau is sort of automating these things, so to get people to respond timely and accurately, so that people understand what's going on. So there's a huge need for sort of increasing that awareness of the data. But on the other hand, there is an important need for discussions of what variables mean, what it means to capture educational attainment, which is an important variable that we all need to have to measure the vitality and the level of development of various communities. But there are often other variables that we are missing and don't capture, which we also care about in terms of cultural connections and those sorts of things. And these challenge the standard notions of data as it presently exists. But there's a role for that type of information: social networks, family networks, cultural connectivity, language abilities, traditional knowledge. Those sorts of variables and information is not easily captured in existing data sets and existing surveys. But there's a real need for that, and there's a role for students to pursue that and to sort of make that an emerging area of an emerging issue in the future. And we, as I said, we have multiple areas that we care about. Just getting basic data is, of course, important, but more and more there are emerging areas and emerging new types of questions, new dimensions of characteristics that we'd all like to see, and we'd like to be able to track the improvement, or maybe not the improvement, in some traditional knowledge over time. And this information, just being able to tell us where we are and where we're going, or where we've been and where we've come from in terms of these various socioeconomic characteristics, is really informative and really necessary for building new programs. One of the most important pieces of information, I think, that, especially for Native Hawaiians, that we received in the 1970s was the number of Native Hawaiian speakers in Hawaii. It had fallen to less than 10,000 people. And that was really the impetus for the push for the revitalization of the Hawaiian language in Hawaii in terms of the Punana Leo, and then after that, the immersion elementary and high schools. And then today, where you now have, one can get a PhD at the University of Hawaii in the Hawaiian language, right? And so that was predicated on having the information on, hey, what's the status of Hawaiian language speakers in the state of Hawaii? Where are we? And realizing that there was an issue. And so, again, as I think the bigger picture that I want to sort of leave everyone with is that the sort of data and statistics can be made useful and can be used in a variety of ways. However, we all have to be, if you want to sort of take part in that, you have to be able to understand what the data is and you have to have some training in that, in basic methods that exist. And so it's an investment, but it's something that will pay off over time and across multiple employment opportunities as well. And I think the last thing I'll just summarize is that, as I said, I'm an economist, and one of the places that I see both Pacific Island populations, but also American Indian populations, other Indigenous peoples populations, groups, is that the one area where there's a really sort of low, not a lot of individuals that are capable of doing it, are quantitative analysis. So one could spend an entire career, could train for these careers and spend their entire time working with just Indigenous peoples across reservations, across First Nations, across Pacific Islands, helping with data analysis, research, and collection. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you so much for your insight and sharing your work. I take away sort of this idea of challenging notions on how data is traditionally collected and to ensure that the data that is given and captured of our Pacific Islander community accurately speaks to the condition of our Pacific Islander families. Thank you for that. Our next speaker is Sheryl Day. Sheryl is currently a graduate student at the University of Washington, Seattle, in the Information Department. Sheryl?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I was asked to come and speak to you all about my perspective as a graduate student, and the question posed was how my experiences through graduate school have contributed to recognition of the significant role that higher education plays in the progress of the NHPI community. And that's a really long sentence. And I wanted to kind of pull this apart just a little bit, because the question of recognition has two pieces there. There's the recognition of self, by myself, and there's recognition by others of what higher education can contribute. What I'd like to do is just go through this trajectory of mine by telling you some stories of three seeds that were planted very early in my mind. And the first seed was the idea of not knowing one's language. The second seed is that the information that we had was old information. And the third seed was that question of who gets to speak. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised on the island of Guam. I attended public schools. I went to LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, to Munning Elementary, Agata Johnston Middle School, and finally I graduated from JFK. I really loved school. I think I did fairly well. As part of the upbringing in Guam, over summers and weekends, I lived with my grandmother over in Sinahanya. And I really loved the time that I spent with her, but my grandmother had very limited English. She had a lot of knowledge, but a limited ability to be able to share that. And so one day while I was really young, we went out to go gather some plants because my grandmother made these medicinal concoctions, I guess, if you will. And she wanted to have me help her pick these plants. And, you know, I would run over and grab a plant, and I would say, "This one, Grandma, is this the right one?" And she would say, "No, not that one." And I would pick up another one, and "This one, Grandma, this one." And she would say, "No, not that one." And finally, you know, I did it again. "This one, Grandma, is this the right one?" And finally, she just shook her head, and she said, "No, Ade. You see, Nai, it's because you don't know your language." And at that point, that seed of not knowing my language was planted pretty early. I don't think that it impacted me as much then as a young girl as it does now when I've had some time to reflect on that. So that was the first seed. So throughout school, I was really taught this whole idea of being competitive. I did so well in high school and did all the honors courses and all of that. And, you know, the second seed that was planted was one day in high school. I had a physics teacher who the class was getting a little bit noisy, and he finally stopped everybody and he slammed the book down on the table, and he said, "You guys, you know something? You guys think that you are all really special." Now, this is a man that I really looked up to. You know, he was Coast Guard, Caucasian American, and taking the time to come and teach us physics. I thought it was really cool. And he says, "You guys think you're all really special? Well, let me tell you something. When you guys go to the States, you might think that you are really hot stuff here in your honors courses. But when you go to the States, you will all be nothing more than C students. You will be average." And we laughed and we asked, you know, why he thought such a thing. And he said, because look at the textbooks that you guys get. The textbooks that you have are the old, discarded textbooks that the schools in the States are getting rid of. You guys have information that's over 10 years old. Second seed was planted. We have this old information. And so you can see that this idea of access to information, access to language and so forth, and the things which we cannot have to help us move forward, this was really starting to become a theme. Fast forward to college. I finished college here in Seattle. And post-college, I ran a martial arts school. It's what I do today, in addition to doing my PhD. But I'd always been into this whole idea of programming and computers, and I had a very, very small taste of that in high school. And when I decided to go back to school, I studied programming and computer science, and I thought I might want to develop games and things like that. Right after that, I went to work for NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and I did that for 10 years. And at that time, I was their everything techie. I wrote lots of programs to automate mapping and data analysis and things like that. And during that time, I got to work with many tribes on some of the grants. And I began to ask questions about what happens to the data that we collect as a result of this partnership with the tribes. No answers. So the next question I had was well, how do people who get to conduct these studies get the money to do that? Why do they get to do that? And I realized that there was this thing called the PhD, and that those who had the PhD were the ones who could go after those grants and conduct research that was considered credible and do all of that wonderful stuff. Basically, be at the table. And so there was my third seed, and that seed of, well, who gets to speak? So here I am in a PhD program, and all of these things that kind of informed where I am now. I sat down with my current advisor, and I asked her why it was I should get a PhD, because I had no idea what it was. And she named a few things which I think are very important, and they think about them often now. One of those is that they will open doors that would otherwise be closed. You will learn to speak a language where others who speak that language can understand and will actually listen. You'll develop a network of colleagues who you would not have otherwise had access to. And you will be able to participate in this conversation where ideas and ideology are formed and discussed. But importantly for me is the development of critical analytical skills of policy and of data. And also this idea that was planted in my mind about getting a PhD and then being able to give back, being able to be reciprocal with this whole, the background and the upbringing that I had. Currently at the UW iSchool, the information school, I am part of an Indigenous information research group. And Zeph, I just want to correct a little bit. I'm studying information science, but in that program, I am focusing on information policy. And as part of that, I've been a lot more active in graduate school than I ever was as an undergraduate. And now it's mainly because I see that I can actually take a significant role. In 2012, Sheryl, who you mentioned, is the person working under the APSA grant down there at South Seattle Community College. She and I ran the Aspire 2012, which was an education summit for Pacific Islanders. And in that, I ran also the STEM session because I feel like it is really important for our Pacific Islanders to be able to see the importance of understanding technology, understanding information, and making those things useful because we do live in an age of information. Other things that being a graduate student has afforded me, I was able to do some really interesting things, such as take students of mine to study abroad, and I taught courses in Tahiti, and those courses were on oral traditions, knowledge, and science. And I think that that was an unprecedented way of teaching Pacific Islander cultures, knowledge, what gets to constitute science. I think that has piqued the interest of some of the administrators. But I will tell you that when I came to the information school, when I came to the University of Washington, aside from all of these wonderful opportunities, I did notice that there was a big lack of Pacific Islanders, the presence of Pacific Islander faculty, that is, and a lack of coursework around Pacific Islander information, current events, and so forth. So a very good friend of mine, Vince Diaz, planted a seed in my mind when he asked me, what was it that I wanted to do after my PhD? And my answer at that time has changed. I said at that time it was certainly not to be a faculty. And I have since changed. He asked me to reconsider that, and I have. And I'll leave you with this, that the idea of being faculty for me is that higher education is this space of learning. And really until Oceania and Pacific Islander studies becomes a reality, the relationship in academia just simply cannot be balanced and reciprocal for Pacific Islanders. The space of higher education needs to be a space that includes Pacific Islanders so that they are not simply just consumers, but they are actually peers and contributors as faculty, as researchers, as mentors. And in Chamorro, we have a word, and we call this inafamalik, and that is to ensure that everything is good, is in our relationality amongst our communities, that what we do is good for the community. And in that sense, I consider the goal of being faculty to be inafamalik. Thank you. I think that's all that I have to say.
Thank you, Sheryl, for sharing and really talking about reflecting on your own journey and your future goals or plans to continue to be an advocate and to be a mentor in higher ed for future students. I think it ties in very well to Akil's first slides about where are we with our pipeline? Do we have mechanisms in place to create more Sheryls, to create more Randys and other folks who can then kind of continue to inspire and also produce the knowledge that's necessary for our communities to understand ourselves a little bit better, but also for folks who are not Pacific Islander to appreciate and understand who we are. Our last panelist is Save, a student from UC Irvine. He's a senior political science and sociology double major. He's an advocacy chair for the Asian Pacific Islander Student Association at UC Irvine. And he's also been active with the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders as an E3 ambassador representing Region 9, which is the West Coast region. And he's also a pilot alum, which is Pacific Islander Leaders of Tomorrow, a program that focuses on our college students, asking them to think critically about issues that Sheryl brings up. Where are we in this pipeline? Where are we in places like higher ed? Where are we with regards to leadership in our communities? And so Save is one of our shining stars in our community, and we're really glad to have him be on the call. Save?
Thank you, Sefa. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Savenaca, everyone. As Sefa said, my name is Save. I'm a native Fijian, born and raised. Migrated to the U.S. when I was 11 years old with my family. And I was asked to sit as a representative in the demographics who are also in undergrad right now, undergraduate education. So I would just like to share just 3 brief points about my experience in academia. First of all, I would like to start with my migration story. Like any other Pacific Islander story, moving to the U.S. was something that really changed my life for me. For the mere fact that my grandparents saw this as an opportunity for us to excel, for an opportunity for us to access resources that were not available to us from our sending countries. So being a member of a population from the South Pacific that's relatively new in its migration, have a lot of things to talk about with respect to the difficulties that I faced and the challenges I faced in my journey in academia. So I'd like to just talk about my motivation for getting to where I'm at today. First of all, coming to the U.S., being a second generation Pacific Islander American, we have this we have this issue of being injected into a new system, having a culture shock, and being injected into this individualistic system, coming from a communal system was really a shock for me. So my parents were always working all the time, so they were working 2 to 3 jobs upon coming to the U.S. So most of the time, you kind of have to just, step up and do your own work, your schoolwork, having to also cater to the needs of your younger siblings. So that was the common challenges that I faced in my journey through education. But I also used these challenges to turn it into a form of motivation for me. They didn't leave their livelihood, their whole livelihood, their families behind so that we could come here and just settle for mediocrity, because that wasn't an ideal, that wasn't a value that my parents and grandparents believed in. They always believed in excelling. Every generation should excel to go up more and, go up another level. So having those kind of challenges when I came here, I didn't receive a lot of resources in middle school and high school, insofar as to stay back, and get SAT helps, ACT helps, get resources from the counselors, get resources with homework help at school, because you always have to come back home and cater to the needs of your family. So you kind of have to just do these things on your own. And I feel like even though I wasn't born here, these challenges are still being realized, are still being faced by people in our community who are even, who are born here. So I would like to just encourage everyone, take the initiative, look out for someone. If you've been through it, go back and teach them and provide guidance for them on how we can do this. We don't have the luxury of time. We don't have the luxury of money to stay back at school, to engage in other extracurricular activities that builds our skills. So in saying that, my second point is accountability. So being accountable to my parents, being accountable to my grandparents who had no form of formal education at all, but I felt like their resiliency, their perseverance, and the fact that they believed that there was a whole new world out there for us, a world where we could, not be limited by our circumstances, but the fact that we can always pursue greater things. That was one of the things that always motivated me, the fact that even though these people that came before us didn't have much to settle for, they made the best of their situation, and I felt that resiliency translated into the things that I turned into motivation, things that I turned into, I turned my excuses into, I'm going to do this. There's no excuse. So the saying, it's either you make it or break it, for me, there was no breaking it. It's either I make it or there's nothing at all. There's no other option. Thirdly, I never saw myself in tertiary education. I never saw myself in post-secondary education. But like I said, the fact that people that came before me had a much bigger vision than me, I felt that I would do not only myself an injustice, but to them, their sacrifices, everything that they've been through, partying, coming to the U.S. and leaving behind part of ourselves that are endemic to us, our culture, having an environment that was homogeneous and you could relate to everyone. So I felt that there wasn't an excuse that I could make for myself. And secondly, another thing that I would like to talk about are the barriers and the challenges that I face. So first, I'd just like to comment on my problems in my journey throughout education, my educational career. First of all, navigating education system. So, like I said, there were no resources available to me. With these resources, I never actually received sort of guidance from what I'm seeing right now through the pilot program, through EPIC, community-based organizations that cater specifically to me as a Pacific Islander, that caters to the cultural things that we value and things that complement our learning experience, things that we see. Because being in the U.S., having to integrate into this new system, you kind of have to adopt a whole new, sets of ideologies that are foreign to you as a Pacific Islander. So when you don't relate to the curriculum, when you don't relate to the teachers that are speaking to you, when you don't relate to the student populace, naturally your ability to learn kind of gets clouded in a way. So that leads to my second point of representation. So when I made it to UCI, I didn't see a lot of Pacific Islanders on campus. So last year, with a student population of 28,000 plus, there are only 28 Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders here at UCI. So that's not even 1% of the student population. And with that, the resources here having no sense of communal identity on campus, it made me reevaluate my decision to even come to tertiary education. And the fact that I realized that even though we were getting to post-secondary education, the retention rates were very low, and there were no sort of institutional system in place that provided these retention help, these outreach programs to our high schools, these sort of even classrooms. So this leads to my last point of having this culture of reticence. When you're sitting in a classroom setting, for me personally, I always had this, cultural constraint where I feared speaking up in class and asking questions, which kind of became a barrier for my learning process. When you don't ask questions, you are left to your own demise to kind of figure out things on your own. And I didn't feel the need to ask my peers because I didn't know if anyone related to me, if anyone related to the fact that I didn't understand a certain concept. So that's why I feel that there is a need for us to be here in higher education for a myriad of reasons. And having gone through all this, it made me realize that we need to be here. We need to be in areas in policy making to incorporate our curriculum in all levels of the education system. This includes ethnic studies classes, because it'll give our people validity to want to learn. It'll give them the fact that what they're learning corresponds to their life, that it's not what they're going through, the challenges they're going through are not isolated. This is everything that we went through as first and second and third generation Pacific Islander Americans in this country. So with these policies, we can develop programs and kind of resources that are relevant to us. For example, as Sefa mentioned, me being a pilot alumni, Pacific Islander Leaders of Tomorrow, they had a lot of different ways to cultivate our learning, to cultivate us into the leaders that they see in our people, by incorporating different sorts of, cultural elements that complemented what we learned in the classroom. And just the fact that we have this space to help us, the space to be, to talk about our learning process and where we're at insofar as education and health and economic and social justice is just something that I wish I would have had coming up. And just to conclude, in achieving all of these and the fact that being one of the E3 ambassadors, I still feel an innate obligation to go back, to go back into the community, to go back into high schools, high schools I was brought up in, and attend communal gatherings, civic islander gatherings, and tell them that, hey, I've made it through. I may not have made it all the way, but I'm at a place that I could offer you guidance on where to make and what to do. Make choices, certain choices that are different to what I made growing up, because I didn't have that kind of guidance or resource from just people around me. Thank you.
Thank you, Save. I went to college a little over 20 years ago as an undergraduate, and a lot of things you're saying still resonate. This idea of being a college student and how much that is a sacrifice, not just for you as an individual, the work that you're going to be enduring, but also for your family and what that could mean for them. Also, talking about sort of how looking at our community and our culture and our elders from an asset-based approach, when you spoke specifically about the resiliency and the perseverance of your elders. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. At this point, we did start a little late, 10 minutes late, so hopefully we can push our Q&A to at least that long. But we do have some questions that came through. Let's see. So for Randy specifically, could the lack of student quantitative interest be due to generational differences? Are students today just not interested in data collection, or is it specifically a lack of interest in data collection of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander people? Randy, could you respond to that?
Sure. I don't know if it's a generational thing. I'm not certain if the generation previously was that interested in it either. In reality, there just wasn't a lot of data at the individual level available to do much of this analysis anyway. So this is kind of a new area that's even possible these days. So from my perspective, I think it's something on the frontier, and you often hear policymakers and legislators talk about evidence-based planning, evidence-based programming. So it's kind of a buzzword, and it's something where governments and policymakers are more interested in it, in sort of these evaluations of programs, evaluations of policies. So I think this is not something just specific to Pacific Islanders or minorities in particular. It's across the board. What I do think, as I was saying, and I think, in order to be able to participate, and I think one of our speakers echoed this as well, to participate, to be at the table, to be able to be in the conversation, you have to have some of the training and some of the background in order to do that. And and I think in these communities, these particular skills are there's just in less abundance, and there might be fear, there might be sort of, again, I think I'm not sure why the answer is that. There's lots of obstacles, but I think it just is in existence. There's a great disparity. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Randy. Another question that came in, and maybe I'll direct this to Sheryl and Save, or just one of you can answer, or if both of you have something you can contribute. One question that came in is, what can we do to change the narrative that Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders can only go to school for sports? And how do we start to change the narrative? How do we start to change the narrative into something that encourages intellectualism for young people? And additionally, do people find that it is difficult to get families to allow their children to move away? Pacific Islander families tend to be very family-oriented, so leaving for school has always been a difficult thing. So maybe, I know that was a lot of stuff to capture in one answer, but maybe Sheryl and Save can speak to that.
It's been a long time since I left home, but I can relate to that. Leaving is very difficult. I was told by my father, my mother, all my relatives, the question was, why do you want to go away for school? We have a school here, and I won't get into the rest of that conversation, but understanding the value of education, and now as a PhD, the question I get is, well, why do you want to do that? How's that going to make you money? So there's always that immediate question about what's that going to be good for in terms of, the monetary value and what you're going to actually contribute back directly to the family. It's something that's quite difficult because the PhD is it's kind of a lonely, difficult experience. And I think in the end, they'll be proudly bragging, as many of our Pacific Islanders families love to do. But, that leaving a school is just, that can really weigh heavily on a student anyway who still doesn't seem to feel welcome in an environment in higher education. Sorry, Sepho, the next question you had was how we can start to change the narrative, I believe. Yeah,
changing narratives of which Pacific Islander folks go to college and.
There's actually, I think that's just going to have to be a continuous conversation. I've lectured in Rochelle Fonoki's classes down there in South Seattle Community College, and we talk about this often, and it's actually a concern that many of her Samoan students have, is that people look upon them and immediately expect, oh, you must be good in football then. And many of those young men that I spoke with find this troubling because they don't want to be looked at like that. They wanted to create, they wanted to make movies, they wanted to write, they wanted to do so many things. But when I say we, I mean the collective American society puts this stereotype on them, and that's all they see on TV is, well, the Samoans are really great in football, and that may be the case, but it's extremely limiting for the potential of Pacific Islanders.
Thank you. Save, do you have anything you'd like to add to that particular question?
Yes. So for me right now, I'm having that problem as well with the community, being able to communicate that in the way that doesn't condescend, that doesn't come off as condescending to our people, because it's a very sensitive topic, and just as communal people, that kind of, being people that just accept things when you're being told. So being labeled as, you're just good at football and things like this, we internalize these things. We never like to challenge it. So I guess in my own personal experience, I have to do it. I can't just talk about it. I can't say, you have to do education because of this. I have to do it. I have to go through education. I have to show to my people that, hey, you're more than hula skirts and bra and coconut bras. You're more than football jerseys. You can do it in academia. And the thing that I learned yesterday, just watching a speech from Chimamanda Adichie, where she was saying that the dangers of a single story is that where she talks about stereotypes. Stereotypes are not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. So by being in academia, by being in tertiary education, we are balancing the view. We are, showing that there's more to us, the complete picture. We are more than everything I mentioned. We can be lawyers. We can be doctors. We can be White House ambassadors. We can form our own organization, community-based organizations that cater to our people. So by doing that, we are stretching the limits that society even places on us. Thank you.
I think we've lost Save. Thank you for the answer. Another question before we wrap up, and we do have to wrap up, is were there any specific institutions that have had programs in their offices that have been successful in serving Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students? I think Akil and Sheryl have mentioned the work that's being done over at South Seattle Community College. I've also had the good fortune of working with folks here in Southern California, both at Santa Monica College, which doesn't have an NPC anymore, but when it did some wonderful things working with trying to get community college students at Santa Monica College transferring into four-year institutions. Out of that program came a partnership with UCLA where they do a summer institute for Pacific Islanders and Native Americans. And then currently have spoken a few times with the folks over here at Mount San Antonio College here in Southern California. So there have been some wonderful examples. I hear of the kinds of support that have happened in the Pacific. I know that in Guam, Saipan, some of the funds were used to build a capacity of the institutions, libraries, buildings, smart room classes. So it's not the beauty of sort of the NRPC program or the NRPC grant is that it's not fixed through programs. It's not fixed to tied to any specific way to spend the funds. You could use it to do a number of things that your organization or your university feels is going to build the capacity of the Pacific Islander students to be successful. And with that, we have to wrap up. I appreciate everyone being on the call today. I appreciate your patience with our late start. And this, as maybe you could tell, maybe you can't. We kind of just jammed a bunch of different folks, a bunch of different voices together because we weren't sure how often we'd be able to do this. And so we wanted to make sure that we were giving as much information and balancing that with a lot of sort of personal stories and anecdotes that folks are experiencing now. In the future, we'd love to, whether it be through EPIC or through collaboration with the White House Initiative, to host other webinars on different topics in education. If you're interested in specific topics, please feel free to email myself, sefa.aina@pomona.edu, and we'll see through our networks who we can pull together to try to make some of these things happen, because I know that this is just the beginning of a conversation, and there are many, many, many more conversations that need to happen. And again, thank you for your patience and your participation, and looking forward to talking with you all or in the future and helping to address some very serious issues in our Pacific Islander community. Thank you.
Thank you for participating in today's conference. You may now disconnect.